Welcome to the Crafty Mini, and in this one got a really cool little project. So I found this at Element Games. It's one of Monument Hobbies, they call them texture trainers, and effectively it's a resin pour 3D portrait that you can mount in a 4x6 frame, which we'll do at the very end as well. And it's basically they've got that classical sort of 18th and 19th century feel, but they're all monstrous creatures, and there's various different types. So what we're going to do in this one is paint this. This is almost like a Napoleonic style sort of general. So what we're going to do is actually paint it up and get it all framed. This has been one of the funniest projects I've done. Very, very different. Although obviously the same painting principles and things going into it, but it was just completely different to what I normally do, and had a lot of fun with this. So starting off, black base coat, nice and simple. And then going around with a sponge, and I want like some of the old paintings you'll see they have like just these faded colours in the backgrounds, so we're going to do a reddish border around the actual piece itself on the back plate with a sponge, just to get a bit of variation and a bit more random sort of textures, and then we'll go in with different colours and just blend those in, just so it looks like you get this really subtle background, and then we'll concentrate on the actual painting of the miniature itself. Right, so at this point I've sponged on the red as sort of like a rough border, and then there's obviously some areas where the sponge couldn't quite get in, so I'm using the same colour, just thinned down slightly, and you can see here with an older brush just painting in those areas, and then just sort of dotting all the way out, just so it blends in a bit more, looks a bit more rough and a bit more ready on there. And then we'll go back in and we'll do some more of the black, just to where I've gone a bit too far with the red, and just going around and picking out key areas. So that's the background done. You can see there, so it's almost like a rough outline around the actual piece itself, the figure, and then with the sponging and the rough sort of scratching with the old brush, using the black and the red going back and forth, it sort of blends out into the edges of the frame. And then we're going to work on the actual colours. So on the packet it's a blue coat, but I wanted to do something a bit different, and red and green always go well together, so we're going to do a sort of green jacket. So it's just a case of getting that initial base coat on, referring back to the little printout that's on the package if I needed, just because there were some areas I wasn't sure if they were metallic or part of the folds, but just going in there and getting that initial green on. So doing quite a dark green because we're going to be highlighting up from this, and obviously this will dry a lot darker as well, and then building up those layers to give a really nice even finish across the actual piece. And you can see here on the wet palette with the lighter green, it's pretty much 2 to 1 for dark green to light green. Mixing that in, getting a good coat, and then I'm going to go in there and start picking out all the little highlights and all the little folds and things. There's a ton of detail on these, I'm not sure what to call them, miniatures, but not. So on these sculpts, but there's a lot of detail. I've also had a look, and Monument Hobbies do different types as well. So I'm going to be getting a few more of these, because when it's all done and framed, it does look really cool. It looks very different, and it's quite fun having it on the wall as well. So I'll be getting some of the others. But yeah, to start with now, so we're going to highlight up again. The paint goes on and it looks really, really bright. But it does darken down as it dries, and I'm just going on there, not being too sort of neat. There's in the bigger flatter areas between the folds, I'm scratching it on a little bit, but making sure all those key raised areas are picked up. Now obviously when you're painting miniature normally you've got your zenithal highlight from above. Now this, because the way if you imagine the sort of bend from the central of the stomach down to the shoulders and the arms, so it's the middle sort of strip of the miniature would have the highest highlight if you were to do it in a traditional zenithal. So what I've decided with this is I'm just highlighting it as if it's just a normal miniature, picking out any folds and things, not worrying too much of a direct light source until we come to do the skin. But when it's in the frame, it all sort of works, because as you sort of move it side to side to look at the 3D, which you'll see later on, it actually starts to it blends better and looks like it's supposed to be done that way, if that makes sense. But the main thing with this, like it is with every paint job, and I've always said this, is just have fun and enjoy it, and this was an absolutely enjoyable process from start to finish. So we've got a bit more of that lighter green added in now, and just going in again and just touching up on those areas, getting the raised details, just making sure you don't fully cover the previous layer, just so you get that nice variation from dark to light, and it adds a lot of contrast. And again, just trust in the process, taking your time, and you can't really go wrong, to be honest. And as I say, these little texture plates, as they call them, absolutely fantastic to paint. I wish they had more of their range, because I've only seen I think there's 4 or 5. If anyone knows of any other companies that do something similar as well, please let me know, because I'd like to have a look at them and see what there is. Because as I say, this was an absolute joy to paint. I had a ton of fun. Now, after I've highlighted 2-3 layers with the green, as I was looking at it, I wanted it to punch a little bit more, have a bit more vibrancy. So what I've done is I've taken a note from my orc skin tutorial, which was out a couple of weeks ago. So with the lightest part of the green that I'm using, I've added a little bit of yellow, and it really does vibrant it up and adds a really nice sort of variation with the tones. And this is going to be the last highlight. Again, like I've mentioned before, whenever you add a layer of paint on, it does obviously look a lot brighter than it will, and it will dry down a little bit duller. But I found that this last particular highlighted layer, especially where the folds of the tunic are, so the material underneath is perhaps not as worn, those little areas, the bits on the collar, they'll get this brighter green just to make it punch a bit more. Right, so you can see there the sort of lining and where the folds on the shirts are, that lighter green, it just, as I say, punches it a bit more. It's still obviously reading as green across the whole of the tunic. And now it's a case of going in and picking out some of the little bits of trim and buttons and things. It's got this quite nice pale sort of rosy gold on the sticker that's on the front of the packaging, and decided to keep something similar to that. So all I've done is ProAcryl's white gold, and then I've added a tiny little bit of rich gold in there, mixed it up just to give it a little bit of extra warmth and a bit more depth of colour. And I'm just going around now doing all the little bits of gold trim, so on his tunic, a few of the medals, things like that, and slowly taking my time, making sure I'm not going over anywhere on the green. And this is one of those things when you've got a miniature or a bust or something like this, when you're painting as well, and you've got these little bits of trim that you're trying to pick out, just slow it right down and take your time, because all this will be doing is just building up your brush skills and your muscle memory, so when you come to paint in the future you'll end up doing it a bit quicker, and you know, be more accurate and things like that. But just take your time with it, don't rush it. It's not about, you know, getting it out, getting painted in one night. It's just about doing a nice job and enjoying the whole process from start to finish. You can see here on the wet palette I've got a different blob of metallic there, so all I've done is added a bit more rich gold, and that's because I'm doing these little shoulder decorations with this. I just want a variation between that and the nice sort of rose gold trim that we've just painted all over the tunic and the medals and things. Again, just adds a bit more variation. It's still reading as gold, it's still a nice contrast with the green, but again, just adds a little bit of difference when you're looking at it, and add a bit more warmth to certain areas of the miniature. One of the things with painting this style of these sort of frame miniatures, there's certain areas where like the force perspective is a bit strange, and some of the details sort of fold in. It's just a case, like with the trim, is taking your time with them, especially when you're going up to the actual the background itself. And then what I personally did is I left a tiny little bit of that red from the outline on the back of the miniature, the sort of backdrop, just a tiny little edge on there, because when we wash this through to get all the raised details and things, I found that it just married enough, and it just, otherwise it looked too abrupt, just having this sort of gold line that runs and stops right next to this red line. And it's just a nice way of just keeping it all there in sort of in unison, and making sure that it doesn't look too stark a contrast when you're painting. Right, so at this point you can see I've done a few little bits of silver detail and things, so the majority of the base coating on the coat, the tunic itself, is done now, and it's a case now I want to push the depth of colour a bit more. So I'm doing heavily watered down washes for this. Yes, they will dry extremely glossy, but we're going to matte varnish these down anyway at a later stage. but this is just going to add a little bit more visual interest, push out the contrast of those colours, especially the greens next to the gold, a bit more, and just add to those little areas of shadow. So I'm just going over anywhere that's green with a green military shade wash from Army Painter, and then we'll be doing different browns and Reikland flesh shade on some of the golds, just to warm them up slightly, and again to pick out all those folds in, like the big sash that he's got running across that's in this gold fabric and things like that. And it's just going around there and taking my time picking out each area. So you can see here a couple of little colours added on, a bit of red and blue on some of the medals. I've done a bluish grey on the hat, but you can see there the wash on the green and the gold in particular, especially on the sash and that sort of belly band. It's really pushed the contrast, gone into the recesses. Before I started painting the skin, I did just quickly hit the tunic itself, all the green areas, with a matte varnish, just because it helped me see the contrast in colour and tone a bit better before I start the flesh. Now, the flesh recipe, I've sort of winged it a little bit with this, done something similar I've done in the past, but the last few touches tried something a bit different, and I was pleasantly surprised with it. So at this point it's just a base flesh tone added with a little bit of white to desaturate it and lighten it up a bit more, and then I've put it on with quite it's a heavy wet blend. So all I'm doing, you can see here, like the way it's drawing on the black, there's the scratch marks and the little bits that are coming through from the black undercoat. Now this coat here, most of this is going to get covered up anyway, but those little dark patches where it's not the opacity of the paint's not pushing through a lot because of how thin the paint is, I'm actually going to keep that, and that'll start being used to help the next layers and just give a bit of texture, a bit of variation on the skin. I'll smooth it out slightly like I am here, but for the majority of it I'll still let show through. So you can see here on the wet palette I've got the original flesh tone. I've mixed in a little bit of ivory just to brighten it up, and then we'll be hitting it with a bright ivory later on. And you can see now, so I'm doing a very thin blend, and as I said, the previous skin tone colour, most of it will be covered up. The reason I'm doing that is it just adds a bit of warmth to the skin, because I want this skin to read a lot paler than it normally is, but it just adds a little bit of variation underneath this thin layer, and because those little scratchy areas of the black undercoat are still showing as well, it just adds enough variation to make the skin look a bit more realistic than just like a nice thin blends of various skin tones, you know, like a dark, a mid and a light. At this point it probably won't show too well on camera, but the next few steps you should see it starts to pop a little bit more as we hit the brighter and brighter colours. Right, so I've added more of the bright ivory as previously mentioned, and now I'm going to hit just the raised areas. Now again, especially with flesh, this goes back to like the Orc tutorial a few weeks ago, because they've got some really interesting sort of shapes in the arms and the jowl of the face and stuff. You can really sort of overemphasize the highlights, and it works. And the same thing with this, because he's got this really sort of gelatinous fat chubby neck, and then an overpronounced nose, similar sort of gel to an orc. Same on the second head that's coming out the uniform as well, and like the bridge of the nose and things, and the big forward brows. You can push them highlights even further and it doesn't look out of place. So any of the big wrinkles and things now, and just getting highlighted up and up and up with progressively brighter layers. And because we've got that base skin tone and the ivory, and it's just because I'm adding more of the ivory, the same sort of tone pushes through all the skin, and it builds up those layers, and it'll start to read as quite almost like a gelatinous, fleshy, saggy sort of skin tone, which is what I want. And then we'll darken up some areas a bit later on. Right, this next bit might look a bit extreme, and I'll be honest, when I first did it I was a bit worried, but I just kept going with it, trusted the process, and it worked. So you'll see on a lot of more recent sort of paint jobs from various artists, you'll see like noses, lips and ears and things will have a slightly different colour to the actual skin tone. One of the most obvious ones I've seen is like on an orc, they'll have obviously the green skin, and then they'll have this pinkish reddish nose and earlobes and things. So I wanted to try something similar. So to start with, I've done an extremely watered down, so this is like 3:1 water to Reikland Flesh shade, and we're just hitting all of the skin first of all, just to, again, give it up a bit of warmth, but the main thing is to hit all those little recessed areas between all the skin folds. Again, it does look a bit extreme compared to the pale sort of tone that I've gone for, but when we do the next 2-3 steps, it'll start to marry up, and we'll get this. I'm going to hit the noses and a bit of the lips as well with a pinkier tone in order to, again, make it look a bit more realistic than just having the one flesh tone across the whole of the faces. And this here, you can see when that wash is dried, I'm just going back in with some of that ivory and skin tone, and just hitting those key areas again, just picking them out. So he's got really pronounced sort of cheekbones and things, and all those more raised areas. But you can see that that very thin down wash has added a lot more warmth and depth of colour, especially in the folds of the main head's neck, you can see, and around the face and all those really sharp features. And it's just a quick way of getting the model ready for the next step. And again, it just adds more contrast and more visual interest to the model. So you can see there, just a few little extra things. I've hit the teeth with just ivory there, just to pick them out a little bit, and we'll add a bit more detail to them. So now what I'm doing is I've got a tiny little bit of red, and we're basically going to hit the noses and the cheeks now, just to give a bit of, like I was mentioning, more colour variation in the skin tone, all the lips and things like that. Now when this goes on, I'll leave the footage running for a little bit on this. It looks like they're wearing blusher and the nose is far too pink, and when I put it on I was like, oh, what have I done? But because I've got that original base colour for the skin tone on my wet palette, I knew I could just, worst case, I could just go back and paint over it. But instead I used that, thinned it right down, and started just going over that pink just to soften it a bit, because it was extremely heavy and it didn't look right, as you'll see here in a moment. Like I say, it looks like they're all wearing makeup. So after, to soften the tone, especially the noses where it goes up to the bridge especially, so I've glazed on some of that skin tone there, just to soften those edges and give a much more natural sort of transition, especially on the cheeks as well. And you can see there they don't look like they're wearing makeup compared to how it was before. The lips as well, just because I wanted to darken those a little bit and again give them a bit more warmth. So I've done the same Reikland Flesh shade wash that I used on the skin earlier, and that's just gone across the lips and the base of the teeth, just to give a bit of discoloration to the tusks and the teeth. So you know, they look like they're used and not particularly well maintained and things. And then for the actual hair now, you can see I'm going in just with an off-white, just to cover the black, and we're going to build up the layers of this and start adding brighter whites on there, all the way up to like a really cold white, just to pick out the highlights on the actual hair. But compared to the previous clip, you should be able to see that the noses and the cheeks especially, they don't look like they're wearing makeup anymore or blusher, and because of the warmth with that wash on the lips, it sort of blends the way down, and I think it makes it look a bit more natural compared to how it was. Right, so those last few touches with the hair, so I'm going in there with a cold white, just picking up the raised areas and those strands that are really standing out. And then what we'll do is we'll hit it with a grey wash that's again like the Reikland Flesh shade, watered down 3:1 water to wash, just to hit those little folds and again just to add a bit more depth of colour. But as you can see, I'm just going through and I'm concentrating the really bright white closer to the head, and on a few of the strands coming down, because that's obviously where the brightest hair would be on the actual miniature. If you think of like where hair grows close to the scalp is where the white hair would be, and you'll see in a second with the wash here how it's added a nice contrast and then a bit more depth to the actual piece. And this is that watered down grey wash I was on about, and it's just going in, it's picking out. It will stain the white slightly as well, so what I did do after this, once this is dry, is some of the strands just go back in and pick that white out. But you can see it's just sitting in all the little recesses, it's showing off all the little details that's on the actual sculpt itself, and just get, again, it's all about texture variation and contrast and things, and it, rather than just looking like a cheap white sort of strand, you can now see all the individual hairs that the sculptor's done on the actual model, and then we'll, as I say, pick those out, highlight them up, and that'll be the paint job finished. It's then a case of going through, so anything that's fabric will get a matte varnish, the skin will get a satin, the hair, what I've done on this one is a bit different. I've done a satin and a matte mix, and then all the metallic trims I've left alone, because obviously you want them to be a bit more shiny, and putting gloss on top of metallics never actually works anyway. But yeah, we'll do some final shots in a second and see how it all looks when it's all framed up. And here's the finished product. So you can see here when it's all framed up, it's just a simple cheap frame I got off Amazon for about £4, just a gold frame, and I think it sets it off really well. It looks really nice. I could probably go for something a bit more ornate for the next one. And the close-ups, I think this is brilliant, and it's such a cool idea because it's something different. It's a bust scale, which I prefer anyway, but because it's a 3D relief from a frame, displaying them something a bit different rather than just putting them in a little glass sort of box or something like that. As I say, if anyone knows where I can get more of these, let me know. The Monument Hobbies have got 3 or 4 others which I'm ordering, and I'll be painting those on future episodes and getting them all framed up as well. As like, I have this little portrait section on my wall, which I think is quite cool. But yeah, go out and try something different. Don't be afraid to sort of take chances and try new things on the miniature. As I say, especially with the skin tones, I really struggled. When I first put it on, I thought I'd made a mistake, but I just kept going, trust the process of glazing down, and I think it's turned out pretty good, all things considered. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you all on the next one. Cheers.